trying to legislate against incidental head contact, and we're not going to eliminate head contact out of the game. It has got to the point where you can't win a contest by too much.
I just don't know anymore what to do, really. Like, it's very, very confusing. When I read last night that he got 3 weeks, I was honestly astonished.
Everyone was saying at the time that it was perfect tackle, so it's a very harsh penalty, but, I mean, what do you do?
In that situation, they want the player to release an arm in motion. That's hard to do without putting yourself at risk.
I feel like this is overstepping the mark. This is just a tackle that you're going to see in AFL footy for the next 50 years. If you eradicate this, you're just going to have to tackle people standing up.
When you're in that situation, as a player, you think, I just can't swing them, that motion. But the one Toby had, I thought it was pretty stiff.
As a player these days, like personally, like I go into tackles now worried about what the outcome's going to be.
When I tackle, I'm really trying to tackle hard. So that's a tough one in the spur of the moment when I'm trying to tackle as hard as I can and you're not really thinking too much about how you're moving to play with the ball.
We are heading down the wrong path. Don't get me wrong. I want players to be safe, but I want our game to still to be our great game. And if we keep continuing on this path, I'm concerned.
The tackle debate.
Very good.
So much of this is framed about the reasonable player. We don't deal in reasonable players. We deal in exceptional players. And on Wednesday nights, the weight of it groans under 1,194 games and 9 premierships. And they see the world uniquely, each of them. David King, Leigh Montagna, Jack Riewoldt, Jordan Lewis. Welcome to you all.
Sounds good. 9 premierships between us.
I'll take that.
I feel like the Wiggles over here right now.
All right, so just give us each just an opening statement about where you feel we find ourselves as we gather this Wednesday night. Geordie, you lead us off.
Well, I personally are confused, I think, like a lot of people. And I've gone back and watched those 2 specific instances on the weekend. And I think my thinking around the tackler being the aggressor in the past, and I saw these 2 instances and the momentum and the force, I think, from the way that I've watched these 2 incidents, is being driven by the player with the ball. So the Charlie Cameron one, you can see that the player has planted his legs and he's driving back and getting concussed. Charlie's, I think, trying to control him a little bit. Then the Toby Bedford one, the momentum is certainly going forward, but yet he makes the lunging tackle, which I think adds to the force. But the Charlie Cameron one for me is a perplexing one. The player with the ball is driving and generating that force, not the player that's the tackler.
Jack?
I think I'm confused. I think we all are. And for me, fundamentally, the fact that we're going to the appeals board for the 3rd time in 7 days says that the tackle isn't sitting well with the football community. Certainly the player fraternity at the moment is a bit confused, or definitely confused. And the Heaney one last week, you probably take it or leave it. With the appeals board, I think they just did that out of probably respect to Isaac Heaney and potentially his Brownlow chances. But, yeah, what are we? 6 weeks out from finals. And we had this conversation last week. We're 6 weeks out from finals and we're going, oh, hang on, is this a new rule? Yeah.
Joey?
Well, bigger picture, for me, the matrix has to change. That's where I find uncomfortable what's happening. I think we could sit here if it's 1 week. If it was 1 week each, we could probably go, look, they're unlucky, but we'll take the week. The 3 weeks for me is not where it doesn't sit right. So I think the whole, if it's any type of concussion, it has to be severe impact. I don't think that's right, because we've had discussions. Some players can get a little backhand into the face and get concussed. Other players can smash their head onto the table and not be concussed. So I think the whole matrix needs to get an overhaul if we're going to suspend players for tackling.
Kingy?
I think the tackle's going to go the same way as the bump. That if you choose to tackle, you've got to weigh up the options. And that's a sad state of affairs, and that's not really where we want to go, I don't think, as a code, but I think that's where we're heading. If you can't, not necessarily guarantee, but you weigh up the risks. And if you're going to go in with that sort of momentum and that sort of force, then there could be a significant downside for you.
It's probably the specifics of actually taking players to ground, I reckon. The tackle will still remain, but it'll get to the point where we're just sort of dancing, basically, and we have to be keeping our feet. As soon as a player loses their feet, you're in you're in a bit of jeopardy.
All right, let's hear from the AFL's Chief Executive, Andrew Dillon, who addressed the furore in Perth today.
I think the players have adapted, but sometimes you just have weekends like we had. But as I said, ultimately it's the health and safety of our players that's the priority, and that's the reason for the tribunal system.
What would the message from the league be to players? Still tackle, but don't take them to ground, or take them to ground more carefully?
Look, I think ultimately, and we've seen the players adapt this year in the main, and there's been, as I said, 11 over 17 matches for each of the clubs, so down from 35 last year. So the players have adapted, and we saw the weekend, but I don't want to be drawn on the two because they are under appeal at the moment.
Is there still room for football accidents? Can you still have an accident where someone does get concussed, but it's not a suspendable event?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a reportable offence that occurs in the front end. So there are actions, but what we're trying to do is prioritise the health and safety of our players, and where we can avoid head-high contact, we want to do that.
Could you look at the MRO matrix, maybe? Is that something that could be reviewed?
Look, we review the tribunal guidelines each year, and the matrix is one thing that we look at and we continue to look at. It's a system that's been in place since about 2004. So it's been in place and it's served the game well for a long time.
So some of the layers of that, one of them is the reasonable player, and the way that it's been imposed by the tribunal and the AFL prosecution. I think it's a fiction as a starting point, and I don't think it's been applied terribly practically. It's searching for perfection. This is, in a perfect scenario, you should have done this, this and this, as opposed to what is practical and, dare I say, what is reasonable. So I was interested, to the four of you who have played it to an exceptional level. Geordie, how does this reasonable player idea sit with you?
Yeah, when I read that, I laughed. And then I was trying to look and think about what a reasonable player would be thinking out on the field. And a lot of these instances are players trying to care for the player that they've been tackled, and some have been suspended. It's like anything that gets introduced, that the AFL introduce, whether it be a rule change, there is so much left to interpretation, and there is no perfect player. Not even the reasonable player is perfect.
Is it too hard to play? Is it too hard for the player now, Jack, in the Bedford situation, to change, to adapt, to let an arm go so Taranto's got an ability to protect himself? Are we asking players too much of the players?
Oh, if your feet are off the ground and you're diving to tackle someone, I think it's too hard to let go, because you're sort of opening yourself up to potentially falling on them, copping a back heel in the head. But, like, I understand that the AFL, and I have been as big a supporter as player safety, but it's not to say that player safety is the be-all and end-all. There is still the essence and the fabric of football that you've got to weigh up. So it can't just be one or the other. Now, Jonathan Brown argued the other night more about the fabric of the game and the essence of AFL footy. So I think that finding this balance is critically important at the moment. There is no tackle, no tackle intent there to hurt.
Joey, in future, should Bedford make the decision before he dived, right, that if I dive here and I pin his arms and he goes to the ground, I haven't got time to let go. So do we have to rewind a couple of seconds before that, saying, hey, what am I about to do now?
Well, we have to decide if we want that as a game. If we want as a game for a player to second-guess making a tackle just in case some bad luck happens or a player hits his head, I'm pretty sure we don't want that in the game. So I think before we get to that level, there are other things, other mechanisms we can put in place. We just can't have players suspended.
Like one. Give us one.
I think, again, it's got to be the reportable, like even Andrew Dillon, it's got to be a reportable action. So there's nothing in Toby Bedford's tackle that was reportable action about his tackle. It was bad luck. And we can't have players suspended because of luck.
I think I'd like to see some examples of what they consider reasonable in those circumstances. I think it's laughable to suggest that in that split second that they had to operate, particularly Bedford, that he was going to remove his arm from pinning both hands and take a different course of action in that moment. I'd like to see an example of what he's talking about. If you can show me an example of what he expects a reasonable player to do, some evidence of that, I'll tick it off. But I can't remember seeing a player ever in that circumstance let go of a grip of a player that's in full tackle in motion.
So 3 years ago, the reasonable player test at the tribunal was that if there was no second action on the lunging tackle, then it was bad luck and momentum that took both players to ground and resulted in an unfortunate concussion. And that was Holman with Duncan. And then 3 years on, last night, the reasonable player was told that they had to know that leaping would drive the opponent into the ground and forceful head contact was likely. That's a 180-degree shift across 3 years. And because the reasonable player doesn't exist, did they get the memo? I reckon as a barrister, you could have a real pop at this tomorrow night, the idea of the reasonable player and that it's the cookie cutter. The other one, I've never seen what they asked Charlie Cameron to do, which was sit Duggan on his backside.
No.
I've never seen that.
No.
So that's not really the standard to apply.
It's not reasonable.
Yeah.
No, and it's not, and nor is as you're taking that tackle front on tackle momentum, you actually can't do that.
No.
Like you're sort of bumbling with momentum that. I look at that.
Charlie Cameron's not even in control of that tackle.
How on earth is that 3 weeks? Like the legs get caught up. He's got perfect tackle technique. You can see how he puts his head to the side. That's actually really good trained tackle technique there, where he's getting his head in there nice and close. But
brings into question then too about the tribunal panel member having ex-players. So the whole point I would think of having ex-players on the tribunal panel is to be able to say they've been in situations like this and understand that it is unreasonable. So I'm not sure why either what the guidelines are with the panel members we're having, because they're not really being able to prove or say that that's unreasonable.
So none of this is to undermine the overall. Andrew Dillon says the first, second and third priority is the welfare of the players. So, Kingy, you got labelled the concussion crusader. So in the debate about how we play the game, there has to be the overarching, there is a necessity for every contact sport in the world to figure out how to limit avoidable concussion. Not to make the game safe, but to make it safer.
Yeah, and we've done that. I think we've taken huge steps, and the game has changed. And some people don't like that, and I understand that. And this is an outlier, this discussion this week. I think we've corrected the bumping. In the main, I think most players understand now what's reasonable and unreasonable. The tackling's a challenge, and I think they've just got this one wrong. And it's hard for the AFL to walk things back all the time. They never concede, we've made an error here, or this doesn't quite fit in the table. We're these series of unique one-off incidences, and we try to put them in the matrix and hard and fast 3-week penalties, or... I just think that's where we're getting it wrong. And it's okay to say this one isn't a reportable offence despite the concussion, but because we operate at the outcome before the action, they find themselves having to fight for the right to play again, which is wrong. If it's the action, these three guys have just said the action's fine. There's no case to answer with the action, but because he's concussed, Chris O has to send it forward.
Would the players be surprised that these events just erupted this week? It's like we didn't know, but the players didn't know about this. The public didn't know about it. How can we get to week 19 of an AFL season and be presented with these situations and the players and coaches are confused? I mean, should the AFL, what roles the AFL take in providing leadership and clarity and education on these incidents?
I suppose it's the randomness of AFL footy. Like, that's just the randomness that we've got two that have sort of been linked intrinsically now, these two instances from the weekend, is that once the first one fell, the first domino fell, the second one was always going to fall, I reckon. It was sort of like, oh, OK. And then you headed into the second case going, well, maybe this is going to be a 3-week suspension as well. But there is the randomness of AFL football, but that is the job of the AFL, to predict the randomness, to make sure when it does happen, we have an answer.
Remember, Kingy, the furor when Nick Maxwell ran over the ball and took out McGinnity.
Yep.
And it was, well, no, that's in the game. It's rough and tough. That's the fabric of the game. And everyone jumped up and down about that. Now we know that the bump, if you choose to bump and hit him in the head, it's widely accepted that that's out of the game. Do you think...
But that's the action.
Yeah, the tackle...
That's the action. Where we're getting confused is when we go to the outcome, like exactly what Kingy said. The outcome, then we've got to find a way to penalise the action. But the bump is the action, then...
Yeah, but the outcome was hitting him in the head. So
Yeah,
we still got the bump.
that bumping action.
Yeah,
so the action is very...
But this is a tackle action.
Yeah.
Will we get to the stage now, as David said, we have just got to accept that if you tackle and pin the arms and take him to the ground and hit the head, That's it.
The onus will be on the tackler. I've got no doubt that's the way we're going. It's the same way as the bump, and we're just taking a long way to get there. The AFL should just come out and make the statement. This is where we're going.
Absolutely,
Get
they
on
should.
board, and the players will adjust. They'll adjust in 5 minutes because they don't miss games. They don't penalise their own teams. I think we've got to just accept that that's where we're going. And I know we're still going to have accidents.
We are, and we're going to have to accept then players are going to be unlucky. There are going to be players that are going to get suspended for bad luck. And that's probably where it sits right now, where everyone's uncomfortable.
And next is marking. That'll be next on the agenda.
Yeah, it will be. It will be. Within 10 years, no doubt, the use of knees in marking contests will be on the agenda.
It's funny how we're talking about not taking players to ground, and then only a month ago we had a senior coach talking about that exact reason, where they were so worried about knee injuries and tackles lasting for so long in 360s. We're going to continue to see more of that if players aren't being taken to ground.
All right, our exceptional players. Thanks for the contribution there, and each
Thanks,
pair
kids.
at the desk shortly to other usual segments.